Hello, and thank you for joining us today for New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association's Workforce Series event, Navigating H-2B Visas. Today's event is presented by Keith Pabian, founding partner at Pabian Law.
Um, my name is Keith Pabian. I am the founding partner of Pabian Law. We're located right outside of Boston in Massachusetts. And we have about 40 people here. About 85% of our practice is H2B related, and we work with a ton of you and your colleagues up in New Hampshire, around New England, and around the country. We work basically everywhere at this point. If there's a seasonal organization, there's a good chance we work with them. I also launched a software company called Seasonal Connect during the pandemic, and I'm going to tell you very briefly about that at the end because it relates very directly to H2B strategy. So with that, let's jump in. And I always like to start with the basics so we don't lose anyone along the way. But one of the things I always like to start with is the reason why we're talking about J1s and H2Bs today is that there's really not that many other there's really not other paths in terms of employing foreign nationals for hospitality organizations. You have the H2B, which I'm going to talk about momentarily. Katie just talked about the J1. And then other than that, there are some year-round options. But even going back to the the Obama administration, they've been making it harder and harder to qualify for year-round visas, especially if you're not a technology university or education organization. So for hospitality, it's gotten harder and harder. We can still do it from time to time, especially for managers. But when you're talking about filling roles and actually getting people to help back of house, front of house, with housekeeping, with front desk, there's really no options there for year round. You could look at green cards, at permanent residency, but even with that, you need a hook to keep them here. And that's where the H2B comes in. What Katie was saying is summer work and travel on the J1 is really what's applicable to almost all of you. That's only a 4-month visa. And so the H2B is really a longer bridge to keep people here, even if you wanted to go down the year-round route. So what an H-2B visa is it's a seasonal visa. You can get it for up to 10 months. So it's a longer term solution than the J1. And one of the things that's nice about it is you can get the shoulder seasons. So especially as all of you seem to be really increasing your seasons, it's interesting, right? COVID's changed so much. And one of the things that it definitely seems to have done for almost everyone is extending your season. We're actually, I've 2 kids and a wife, and we're actually coming up to New Hampshire for Columbus Day weekend, which it's funny, I can't remember ever doing that before. And it's just, I think we're trying to stay local. Our kids aren't eligible for the vaccine yet. And it's just, I think it's people like us that are driving your season longer and longer. And so that's where the H2B can come into play. Now, you can get it for up to 10 months, but you have to apply for the season that your organization has, because at the absolute basic level of H2Bs, the thing that we're trying to prove most is that you're a seasonal organization with a seasonal need. So when we go through the application process, that's actually the thing we spend the most time on, preparing and proving to the federal government that you're a seasonal organization. So let's say that your season runs from, let's say, May through October. That would be the period of time that you'd want to apply for the H2Bs. You apply every year. So one of the downsides of that is this is something that the employer needs to pay for. So this, unlike the J1 where it's really a cost neutral visa, this is something that would cost money. And so every year this would be something that you would want to put into your budget. On the other side of that, one of the benefits of applying every year is that you do get to make changes year to year. You can change the positions that you apply for, you can change the dates that you apply for, the numbers, and so on. You get to set the requirements of the position. So let's say that you need servers and you have fine dining and you want 3 months of fine dining experience. You can put that into your application. Now, when the application is all done, when the workers are actually coming to you, they can either come from outside the country, so they could come in from their home country, or they can transfer to you from an opposite season organization. So what's really cool about New Hampshire is that you actually have both seasons in the state, right? So let's say someone's working at a ski mountain in the winter, they could transfer to a summer resort like let's say on Lake Winnipesaukee in the summer. So, and we'll talk more about that because that's actually one of the tricks to H2Bs right now. So, yeah, so two different ways to bring them in. So in terms of understanding the actual process of getting the H2Bs, this might be the most important thing that I tell you today, because frankly, from a application standpoint, we will guide you through the whole thing, or whoever you work with would guide you through the whole thing. But if you don't start in time, that's where you can get into trouble, because if any of you ever did H2Bs about 10 years ago, the laws drastically changed in 2015. And one of the weird things, overall, they changed for the better. There's a lot more predictability. There's a lot more cost predictability that goes in, a lot clearer regulations and so on. However, they put in this weird requirement that you move forward with one of the steps of the applications in this 15-day window in the middle of the process. So you can't catch up like you used to be able to many years ago. So that's my long way of saying, if you're going to go through this, make sure you know the dates. If you have an April, May, June start date, you need to start right now, literally right now. We are already working at our office on summer 2022 petitions. Okay, so I'd say spring, summer 2022 petitions. I will say we're just getting started. It's not too late to move forward, but now is the time to do it. If you're a winter season organization, so October, November, December start date, April 1st is when we start. Okay. Again, if you learn nothing else from my 30 minutes here, this is the most important piece, because everything else you can figure out on the backside of it. Okay. All right. So in terms of what we're seeing, these are the popular H2B jobs right now. Now, as I'm reading through this list, keep in mind, you can apply for whatever you need at your property. This is, though, kind of what we're seeing on the ground at our hospitality-focused immigration law firm. Back of house, we're seeing cooks and dishwashers. Front of house, we're seeing servers and busser runners. Housekeepers, front desk, grounds, maintenance engineering, retail, and cashiers has gotten popular. And then for our ski clients, lift ops, snowmakers, and ski instructors. So this is what we're seeing. That being said, you can apply for whatever you want. We've worked with some clients on Lake Winnipesaukee that do boat rentals, and we've applied for deckhand or dock hands, whatever you want to call that. We work with some clubs that have horse facilities, and they apply for grooms, which are the people that work in the stables with the horses. We work with yacht clubs, and they apply for boat cleaners and boat fuelers and so on. It really is what you need. As long as you're seasonal, you apply for what you need. But keep this in mind. The application, even though your ultimate goal with H2Bs is to get the workers, the most important thing to understand when you're going through the process is that it is about the job position. So the people only come in at the very end, right? So we leave about 6 months to go through the process. Month 4 and 5 is really when we're dealing with the people element of who the workers are that are coming to you. The other months we're spending going through the seasonality process, but it all involves proving seasonal need for a specific role at your company, such as cooks, such as busser runners, and so on. So as you're thinking about, if you are thinking about H2Bs, the thing that you want to be thinking about is what are the jobs that your organization needs to fill in terms of solving this staffing crisis. Okay, in terms of the countries, the H2B countries are a little bit different than the J1s. When I go to Storyland with my kids, you see a lot more Asian nationalities with J1s. With H2Bs, it's really these countries: Jamaica and Mexico, Eastern Europe, South Africa, the Philippines, UK, Ireland, Brazil. That's where we see the most come in. There are 150 plus eligible countries, but these are definitely the ones that we see the most, especially in hospitality. There is a travel requirement to get people to the work site at the start of the season and potentially fly them home when it's over. So one thing that has become very common is to see a lot of Jamaicans and Mexicans, just because the travel costs are much less coming from those countries. Okay, so a couple of things just that I get asked a bunch. So one thing to understand is that you don't have to be a large organization to apply for H2Bs. You don't have to be the biggest ski mountain. You don't have to be the biggest restaurant group. You don't have to be the biggest hotel. If you have a need and the cost justifies it, then you can apply for it. We've worked with a golf club for years that applies for 5 people over 2 positions every year. So basically they do 1 position for 2 people, 1 for 3, and that's what they need. but applying for those 5 people makes them feel fully staffed. It doesn't matter how big you are. And especially in this job market, I think that it's important to know that you don't have to be a certain size, and to know that more and more organizations are turning to H2Bs regardless of size. Now, I'm speaking a lot about cost, and I should give you that number just to understand what that looks like. I can only speak for us, but at our office, it costs about $6,500 to $7,000 per job category to go through the application process. So $6,500 to $7,000. That includes legal fees, government fees, and mailing fees. Those are the petition costs. We only charge per person if they're coming from an in-country employer, and that's about $300 a person. Okay, outside of that, the big cost is travel. So if they're coming in from abroad, that would be an international flight. If they're coming up from Florida, that would be a domestic flight. But just to give you an idea of the cost here as I'm talking about budgeting, because to me, the size piece is really a cost-benefit analysis more than anything else. Okay, so in terms of other requirements, you are not, NOT, not required to provide housing or daily transportation from housing to worksite. However, just like with J1s, H2Bs are very competitive right now from a recruiting market. If you can't explain to people where they're going to live and how they're going to get to work, then it's going to make it very difficult for you to get good H2B workers in, or any whatsoever. You don't have to provide it though. So it's okay to work with a local apartment complex or some way of facilitating that, but you're going to want to have that answer. Now, if you do provide employee housing, it's the one thing that you can charge the worker for. So again, the H2B is an employer cost. You can offset the housing costs at least by deducting wages or charging the workers for the housing piece. Okay, so far as we've spoken about H2Bs, I've basically said to you, I've told you the cost, I've told you the requirements. One of the things about H2Bs is you get really, really good workers. These are usually your higher level workers that are hourly. But they're really, really good workers. Usually what I hear is when organizations turn to H2Bs, it brings up the whole level of the team. And what I will also say is I very rarely see an organization stop doing H2Bs once they start, because the workers are so good. That being said, this is the worst part of H2Bs, is this numerical cap. I think a lot of you have probably seen this in the news because it's so relevant to New Hampshire and New England and basically every summer season employer. So here's the issue that we are all faced with. H2Bs were created in the 1990s. In the 1990s, our wonderful congressional representatives arbitrarily came up with a number, and they've never changed that number of workers that are eligible to come in on H2Bs. So the government uses its fiscal year. And so the government fiscal year starts on October 1st. Okay, so everything starts October 1st with the federal government. So from October 1st until March 31st, so the first 6 months of the government year, they make 33,000 H2B visas available. Then it resets, and on April 1st, from April 1st to September 30th, the other 33,000 H2B visas are allocated. The problem is that that's not enough. And the problem is that almost all industries and employers that utilize the H2B program fall into the summer season. So summer season being that April to September period. So here's the way that it works in practice. If you are one of the lucky New Hampshire organizations that is a winter season property, you don't care so much about this cap. It has been hit earlier and earlier, but as long as you have an October or November and hopefully early December start date, you don't have to worry about the cap, because they don't run out of visas for at least 2.5 months. If you have an April, May, June, July, August, or September start date, then what happens is the cap gets hit, and it gets hit on the first day. So if you have an April 1st start date, then you're eligible for this cap. If you have an April 2nd or later start date, you've already missed out. What they do is when they get through that April 1st filings, they always receive too many, and they do a random lottery. The lottery odds completely depend on demand. And what we've seen is the demand keeps increasing year after year after year. I think that heading into 2022, the odds are going to be lower than ever. It's a mess. They keep talking about fixing it. I will believe it when I see it. And I'm generally a very optimistic individual, but it is annoying to say the least. What they have done, just one other thing on the cap before I talk about how to avoid the cap, is they have added numbers almost every year. The only year they didn't do it was the COVID year, where unemployment spiked right as they were getting ready to release more numbers. Every year, though, when they release it, we don't know the number that they'll release more. We don't know when they will. And we don't know what requirements they're going to have on those extra visas. So there are some organizations that say, we'll apply for the lottery. We'll apply for April 1st. We'll go through the lottery. If we don't get it, we'll go in on the extra cap. But keep in mind, for this past year, for 2021 summer, we had clients that applied under the second cap, and most of them got it, but there was still only an 85% chance of getting it because they had to do a second lottery due to demand. So that is the cap. It is by far the worst part of H-2Bs, but it only applies to people coming in from outside the country. Okay, so people coming in from their home country are subject to this numerical cap and lottery if they're in the summer, if you have a summer season property. But if they're in the United States already and you can find them and they can come work for you, they are exempt from the cap and lottery. Okay, so this is the way around it. If you have a summer season and you don't want to do the lottery, or let's say that you have a later start date, which a lot of you in New Hampshire do because April 1st can be very cold, then the way to look at this is to do these in-country transfers. So if they're coming to you from winter season, whether that's in Florida, in Arizona, in ski country, that's the way around the cap. And it can be very successful. These workers can stay for 3 years consecutively, and then they have to go home for 3 months, and then they can come back for 3 years, home for 3 months. During those 3 years, they bounce back and forth between seasons. You can get really great experienced workers on this path. There are a couple of downsides to this though. One is that you want to find good partners from the standpoint of you don't want to have too much overlap. You can't have gaps. You don't want to have a situation where the winter season organization is ending in April and your season starts in May. That the workers need to have continuous employment. But if there's too much overlap, the other issue that can come up is that the worker can only be in one place at one time. And that's how you end up fighting with the other organization saying, we need the worker now, while they're also saying, we need the worker now. That's probably the biggest issue with in-country transfers, other than the recruiting market. It is really hard to find these people. What I'm telling you right now is not a secret, that the people here are exempt from the cap. So finding the workers is definitely the hardest part, beyond aside from the overlap. And there hasn't been a great system in terms of finding those workers until now with Seasonal Connect, and that's why I'm going to talk about that briefly at the end. Okay, so before we talk about that, let's just talk about where things stand today. So with H-2Bs, because organizations, here's what we're seeing just in practical terms, right? J1s are also very popular right now. And again, you can look at both. A lot of our clients do both J1s and H-2Bs. What we're seeing though is I've never seen so much demand from both winter and summer organizations for H-2Bs, because they need them for longer seasons. They need good workers. They need to be able to fill these roles. Your seasons are getting longer. You're not getting any workers whatsoever. And we're just seeing more and more turn to H-2Bs that haven't utilized them in the past. We're also seeing organizations that have done H-2Bs for many years turn to H-2Bs more. So they're increasing their numbers, they're increasing their positions. It's just, I've never seen anything like this. And frankly, I never thought I would. It's crazy. In terms of the petitions themselves, things are going really smoothly with the government. The government did some extra stuff around the pandemic when unemployment ballooned, and all those things have since been rolled back, and it's back to business as normal with the government. The numerical cap is definitely a massive issue. I think it's going to be the biggest issue ever. I think my expectation personally is I think that the chances in this year's lottery for summer season is going to be less than 50%, which would be an all-time low in terms of percentage rate of success. But I just think the demand is so high that that's going to bring that. In terms of issues with bringing people here, it's interesting. This is where things changed yesterday. And I'll talk about this in a second, but the President Trump's travel bans are still in place through October, and I'll talk about why it's ending in October in a second. COVID is definitely still an issue, although we are seeing people get in. The biggest issues that we've seen have been in South Africa in terms of delays, but like Jamaica and Mexico are going really smooth. Filipino workers are eligible for H-2B visas again, which has been huge news, especially in the culinary area, that a lot of the chefs love having cooks that are Filipinos. And the government audits definitely went down. We were seeing a lot of them during like the third and fourth years of the Trump administration, but it really calmed down over the last year, and it's been really nice not getting audit after audit. In terms of just trends and issues overall of employing foreign nationals, none of you can find staff. I mean, that's just, to say that's an issue is an understatement. The travel bans are still in place for South Africa and Europe through October. That's all changing in November. You can see on this slide, the Biden potential vaccine requirement became a reality yesterday morning. They're going to require now anyone coming in as of early November to be fully vaccinated, which is going to be an issue because there are a lot of countries that use H2Bs that don't have access to vaccines right now. Jamaica and Mexico come to mind. So we're going to see how that plays out, and that's brand new. So we're still waiting on a lot of details there. A lot of delays with the year-round options, and then we did see audits. The one area where we did see audits is people that filed in that second cap that happened after they made more numbers available. We saw that there were audits on those asking to prove irreparable harm, because when organizations that filed under that had to attest that if they didn't get their H-2B workers, they were going to suffer irreparable harm. So there were audits around that. That being said, we haven't seen audits now in a couple of weeks, or it's probably longer than that, a month or so. And it really seems like it was targeted just at those people that filed with the extra cap. In terms of Biden, it's interesting. I remember when he was running and then got elected that there was a lot of optimism that things would revert back to the way the immigration system was pre-Trump. The Trump administration was very anti-immigration, and I'm saying that in a non-political way. That they were very vocal about that. Biden is not. Biden's very pro-immigration, pro-employment immigration, especially. That being said, things haven't really changed. Partly because to get anything through in Congress is a nightmare, especially if there's any immigration stuff associated with it. The other thing that we've seen is that the labor unions definitely feel like they've gotten a voice now. Labor unions are very much a Biden love. He definitely runs on that platform, and the labor unions oppose H-2Bs and immigration in general. So basically we're where we were. It's the same system. I just think that immigration isn't as targeted, and it's been a relief from that standpoint. We're not seeing endless interpretation changes every week. In terms of COVID, a lot of those impacts have subsided, at least momentarily, other than this vaccine requirement that I'm going to talk about in a second. In terms of like the consulate delays and the closures, it doesn't seem like they were as bad as they were, other than some very specific ones. In terms of preparing for next season, so this coming winter, I think the big question is, when are workers going to arrive? Because there are those delays are clearing, but they're still there. The unprecedented demand is there, and the cap will be hit earlier for winter, but I'm hopeful that we got all of our clients in early enough that that for hospitality it shouldn't be a huge issue. But if you have a November or later start date, you're going to need to make sure that all of your foreign nationals are vaccinated before they come in, including J1s. For summer 2022, the cap impacts and the low odds in the lottery is definitely going to be an issue that you have to know about. In-country recruiting is going to be harder than ever because people, again, know about that. Vaccinations will be mandated, and you should definitely consider seasonal connect, which I'll talk about in a second.
Thank you for joining us for today's event on navigating H-2B visas. If you have any questions, please see Pabian Law's Keith Pabian or New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association's Amy Pariseau for more information.